Imagine living in a house, right? And the support beams are just actively splintering.
Oh, man.
Yeah, the foundation is cracking. The roof is literally threatening to cave in at any moment. But every time you tried to point this out, your neighbors just smile and, like, compliment your exterior paint job.
Right, they completely ignore the structural damage.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And in fact, your own family tells you to just keep quiet about it because, complaining might bring down the property values for everyone else in the neighborhood.
Which is such a wild dynamic to think about.
It is. And today, we're looking at the deadliest elephant in the room. We are taking a deep dive into a really powerful essay by a writer known as the Almighty Dread.
Yeah, titled Breaking the Silence, Healing the African Home.
Right. And our mission for you today is to unpack these hidden realities of domestic abuse in African relationships. We want to look at how this abuse masquerades as this untouchable tradition, and then chart the very specific steps outlined by the author to heal generational trauma. Okay, let's unpack this.
So to really grasp the gravity of this, we have to start with a profound contrast that sits right at the center of the source material.
Right, the contrast between the culture and the crisis.
Exactly. On one side, you have the undeniable beauty of African culture. I mean, we are talking about these deep wells of wisdom, incredibly resilient family values, communities that genuinely look out for one another, and this rich, sustaining spiritual depth.
It's a very vibrant foundation.
It really is.
Yeah.
But running in the shadows of all that beauty is this hidden crisis that's basically destroying homes from the inside out. And, well, the most dangerous element isn't just that the crisis exists.
Right.
The true danger is that society actively and often aggressively engineers a culture of silence around it.
Yeah, and the mechanism of that silence is, well, it's what we really need to look at first. Because visible abuse, the kind that leaves physical marks, it doesn't just happen in a vacuum.
No, absolutely.
It gets hidden in plain sight because society wraps it in these socially acceptable, almost like honorable labels.
Right, they rebrand it.
Exactly. A black eye or a bruised arm gets minimized and recategorized as discipline.
Which is terrifying.
It is. And controlling behavior gets labeled as culture. And most tragically, possessing and breaking another person's spirit gets justified as love.
Yeah, and when you take a behavior that is fundamentally destructive, right, and label it as a tradition, you instantly weaponize the culture against the victim.
Oh, wow.
You make the behavior totally untouchable. I mean, if abuse is just, how our culture does things, then the moment a victim speaks out against the abuser, they aren't just reporting a crime.
Right, they become the problem.
Exactly. They are framed as betraying their heritage. They are cast as a rebel against the community's entire way of life. Which brings us to the primary driver of the silence, the overwhelming, just desperate mandate to protect the family name.
And in so many of these communities, the family name isn't just like a point of pride, it's a vital form of social currency.
Oh, 100%.
If the family name is tarnished by scandal, you don't just feel embarrassed. You lose your social standing, you lose your community support network, and in some cases, you literally lose your livelihood.
Right.
So the pressure to avoid shame and preserve the marriage at literally any cost to the individual's physical safety, it becomes this absolute law.
Yeah, and the source outlines several specific interlocking trapping factors that enforce this law. First, you have these intense religious expectations.
Right, the spiritual pressure.
Exactly. Many institutions preach endurance over safety. They subtly suggest that, suffering is a spiritual test that will be rewarded in the end.
Which keeps people locked in.
It does. And then you add financial dependency into the mix. If a victim has been systematically kept out of the workforce, they lack the literal currency required to just walk out the front door and secure a safe place to sleep.
So they're trapped financially and spiritually.
Yes. Combine that with the sheer terror of public judgment and a severe lack of legal protection or enforcement, and, the victim is entirely boxed in.
When you stack religious pressure, zero financial independence, public shaming, and a legal system that just shrugs off domestic calls as private family matters, staying silent isn't just a choice, it's a survival mechanism.
Absolutely.
But the irony here is what all this protection actually achieves.
What's fascinating here is the tragic contradiction of the entire system. Because the community's stated goal is to preserve the family unit.
Right, that's what they claim they're doing.
But by enforcing this silence and allowing the abuse to continue, they are destroying the actual psychological foundation that makes a family function at all.
Yeah.
The physical scars might heal, but the ongoing trauma just obliterates a person's confidence, their mental peace, and their capacity to emotionally nurture their own children.
It hollows them out.
It really does.
In the desperate attempt to save the mere image of the family, society is literally sacrificing generations of human potential.
And that brings us right back to that house analogy we started with.
Oh, right. You are so obsessed with the neighborhood association's rules on how the house looks to the people walking by that you completely ignore the fact that the roof is collapsing on the actual people living inside.
That's a perfect way to picture it.
The exterior paint is the family name. The crumbling foundation is the abuse behind closed doors. And because society has successfully masked the most visible forms of physical violence by calling it discipline, well, they've engineered this massive cultural blind spot.
Yeah, and that blind spot is the breeding ground for something even more insidious.
Oh, the invisible stuff.
Exactly. When society decides that physical aggression is just a normal part of domestic life, it completely loses the vocabulary to even recognize or combat non-physical abuse.
It just doesn't register.
Right. The essay emphasizes that domestic violence is rarely limited to physical assault. In fact, the physical violence is often just the enforcement tool for a much broader, invisible system of control.
Yeah, the text details this calculated dismantling of another person's autonomy through emotional manipulation, threats, public and private humiliation, and forced isolation.
Isolation is a huge one.
It is. I mean, think about the mechanics of isolation for a second. It doesn't usually start with, like, a locked door.
No, it's way more subtle than that.
Right. It starts with an abuser criticizing a spouse's friends, and then it progresses to causing immense emotional drama right before family events.
Oh, so the victim just simply stops wanting to go to avoid the fight.
Exactly. They self-isolate just to keep the peace. And before long, the abuser is the only voice the victim hears, the only source of truth.
And then you add financial control to that isolation,
Sure.
where the victim has their paycheck confiscated or, they're given this degrading allowance for basic needs.
Yeah, having to beg for grocery money.
Right. And once that happens, the psychological intimidation is complete, which leads to one of the most chilling phenomena described in the source, which is the public smile masking private pain.
The public smile.
Yeah. Victims learn to project perfect happiness and public smiling at community gatherings, presenting this image of an obedient, serene household, but silently, they are just drowning in anxiety, depression, fear, and total emotional exhaustion behind closed doors.
Okay, but I struggle with the idea that the community is entirely to blame for not intervening here.
Okay.
I need to push back on this point a little. Because if these abuses are truly invisible, like a spouse quietly draining a joint bank account or slowly alienating their partner from extended family over the course of literally years, how can we reasonably expect neighbors or community elders to step in?
That's a fair question.
Right. Because they literally cannot see the financial control or the private intimidation. Aren't these invisible abuses designed exactly to evade community detection?
It is true that abusers are absolute masters of hiding their behavior. But we have to look at why they are able to hide it so effectively in the first place. Okay. The community doesn't see it because they are culturally trained not to look for it. They turn a blind eye to the precursors of control. If we connect this to the bigger picture, society actually rewards the abuser's facade.
Wait, rewards it? How?
Well, the community praises the man or woman who has the quietest, most submissive partner. They reward the appearance of rigid stability.
Oh, I see.
They don't ask why the spouse suddenly stopped attending social gatherings or why they never have access to their own money, because asking those questions disrupts the polite social order. Society chooses the comfort of the public smile over the messy reality of the private pain.
Wow. So the comfort of the illusion is prized over the safety of the individual.
Exactly.
So the victim realizes that crying out for help won't just enrage their abuser, it will also, alienate the community.
Because the community doesn't want the illusion shattered.
Which totally explains why people endure this invisible, paralyzing abuse for decades without recognizing it as the trap that it is. But to understand why people accept this as normal in the first place, we really have to look at how their baseline understanding of love is built.
And this is where we trace the problem back to its root. We're talking about deeply ingrained, gendered societal conditioning that begins in early childhood.
Right, the generational echo.
Yes, the generational echo of toxic environments.
Yeah.
The author breaks this conditioning down into two distinct, highly damaging tracks. First, there's the conditioning of young boys.
Toxic masculinity.
Right. And toxic masculinity isn't just about men behaving badly. It's a systemic robbing of emotional vocabulary.
That's a powerful way to frame it.
Young men are taught that vulnerability is a weakness that will be punished. They learn that the only socially sanctioned way to express frustration, fear, or even sadness is through domination, anger, and aggression.
Aggression basically becomes the only tool they are allowed to carry in their emotional toolbox. If a boy feels insecure, he is taught to dominate his environment to regain control. And running parallel to that, you have the conditioning of young girls.
Right.
The source highlights this deeply troubling romanticization of female suffering. Women are often conditioned from childhood to view their capacity to tolerate pain and mistreatment as like literal proof of their loyalty and worth as a partner.
Yes. They are taught that suffering isn't a glaring red flag signaling them to escape. It's a noble test of their commitment.
That is just heartbreaking.
It is, because when you place an individual who has been conditioned to equate control with leadership, alongside an individual who has been conditioned to equate absorbing pain with love, well, the resulting environment is explosive.
Yeah, the home becomes a theater of fear rather than a sanctuary of love.
Exactly. But the true generational tragedy unfolds in the minds of the children growing up in that home.
Because they're watching everything.
Children are incredibly perceptive sponges. They absorb the tension, the silent treatments, the explosions, and the eventual uneasy truces. And they normalize it all. They unconsciously map these destructive, fear-based dynamics as the baseline definition of marriage.
And then they carry that map right into their own adult lives because it's the only topography they've ever navigated.
Yes, exactly.
It's like inheriting a broken compass from your parents. You sincerely think you were heading north toward a happy, stable family, but because the internal magnet is fundamentally skewed, it pulls you right back into the exact same ditch of aggression and silent suffering your parents were stuck in.
That's exactly how it works.
And you don't even realize you were off course.
This raises an important question, though. How does a society interrupt this cycle when the children growing up within it don't even realize the water they're swimming in is toxic?
Right. How do you fix a problem you can't even see?
Well, for a long time, the silence we discussed earlier prevented anyone from even acknowledging that the compass was broken. But acknowledging the damage is really only half the battle. The text transitions from diagnosing this profound generational sickness to laying out the actual mechanics of healing.
It demands that we completely rebuild our map.
Yes, it does.
And rebuilding the map starts with redefining our metrics. We have to clearly distinguish between fear-based control disguised as love and what an actual healthy relationship requires.
And the source material doesn't leave this ambiguous. It provides a very specific framework.
Right. Real love and genuine tradition do not thrive on intimidation. A healthy relationship requires open communication, deep mutual respect, emotional maturity, mutual protection, patience, and shared growth.
The term emotional maturity is critical here.
Oh, absolutely.
Because it directly counters the toxic conditioning of young boys we just discussed. Emotional maturity means having the capacity to process your own feelings of insecurity, frustration, or disappointment without making those feelings someone else's physical or psychological problem.
Yes. But the author makes it clear that expecting individuals to suddenly just achieve emotional maturity isn't enough. Not when the systemic pressures of society are pushing them in the opposite direction. We need macro-level societal solutions.
Yeah, and those societal solutions involve dismantling the trapping factors we looked at earlier. It requires widespread education and shifting the cultural vocabulary so victims can actually name the psychological abuse they are experiencing.
Naming it is the first step to fighting it.
Right, and it means overhauling the legal systems. I mean, laws against domestic abuse mean nothing if police officers dismiss calls as just family disputes, or if the courts don't have the teeth to actually protect a victim who is brave enough to come forward.
And we cannot understate the importance of economic empowerment, which the essay highlights as a really crucial step.
Right, the financial independence.
Exactly. When a person has access to their own financial resources, whether that's through microloans, job training, or just basic financial literacy, the invisible chain of financial control snaps.
Wow, yeah. A victim who can afford rent and food for their children is exponentially more likely to leave an abusive situation. Money in this context isn't just wealth. It is literal freedom.
All of these solutions, though, the legal changes, the economic empowerment, the mental health awareness, they all really hinge on one foundational shift.
What's that?
We have to create communities that are willing to speak openly. We have to dismantle the worship of social appearances. Because if the neighborhood association continues to prioritize the exterior paint over the structural integrity of the home, nothing changes.
And that brings us to the ultimate thesis of the text, which challenges how we measure the value and success of a society as a whole. It is a massive paradigm shift.
A completely new way to look at it.
Yes. The author argues that a strong society should not be measured merely by its economic growth or its GDP. It certainly shouldn't be measured by the packed pews in its places of worship or its outward displays of religious piety.
So what is the measure?
The singular true measure of a strong, prosperous society is how safely its people are able to live, love, and exist within the walls of their own homes.
That is profound. If your economy is booming, but the people inside your society's homes are living in silent terror, your society is failing.
Period.
Healing only begins when the culture stops glorifying silent endurance and starts actively protecting human dignity. Which, honestly, begs a very practical question for you listening right now.
Right.
When we are navigating our own lives, observing relationships in our own communities, how do we actually distinguish between a genuine cultural tradition and disguised abuse?
You have to look at the fruit the tradition bears.
Yeah.
A genuine tradition enriches the community and it elevates the individual.
Yeah.
If a tradition requires a person to surrender their basic human dignity, if it relies on generating fear, enforcing isolation, or suppressing someone's voice just to maintain order, well, then it is not a tradition worth keeping.
Just control.
Exactly. The text argues forcefully that this is simply abuse wearing a cultural mask, and stripping away that mask requires the community to stop prioritizing the reputation of the family name over the physical and mental safety of the human beings who carry it.
A family name built on the silent suffering of its members is already broken, whether the community admits it or not.
It really is.
We have covered some incredibly heavy, challenging, but just completely necessary ground today. Let's trace the arc of what we've unpacked.
Yeah.
We started by examining how the very real violence of domestic abuse hides behind acceptable cultural labels like discipline and tradition, and how that's propped up by a societal obsession with protecting the family image.
Right, and then we explored the devastating blind spot this creates, which allows invisible forms of abuse like financial control, forced isolation, and psychological intimidation to trap victims behind a mandated public smile. And the community's refusal to look past that smile just ensures the victim remains totally isolated.
From there, we dug right into the root of the problem, the generational conditioning. We saw how toxic masculinity strips boys of emotional vocabulary, replacing it with aggression, while girls are often conditioned to view their endurance of pain as a literal measure of their worth.
Which creates that deeply toxic environment that the next generation absorbs and just maps as their own definition of normalcy.
Exactly. And finally, we looked at the roadmap for healing. It requires redefining love through emotional maturity and mutual respect. While society has to build systemic escape routes through economic empowerment, real legal protection, and a fundamental shift in values.
Measuring societal strength not by wealth or public piety, but by the safety of the individual in their own home.
Here's where it gets really interesting, and this is the thought we want to leave you with today. The source highlights a profound truth about how children learn.
Okay.
They don't form their baseline definitions of massive, life-defining concepts like love, respect, or endurance based on the lectures they hear.
No, they don't.
They learn them by absorbing the subtle dynamics silently modeled in the home day after day. They watch how conflict is resolved, how power is wielded, and whose voice is silenced. If our deepest understandings of these concepts are shaped without words, well, what silent behaviors are you modeling right now that the next generation will interpret as the definition of love?
That is a question that requires total honesty to answer. Thank you for walking through this difficult but incredibly important exploration with us today.
We deeply appreciate you joining us on this deep dive. We hope it gave you a new lens through which to view the world and the courage to look past the exterior paint. Keep exploring, keep questioning the structures around you, and keep learning. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.